22nd of December, which is a National Mathematics Day. And the reason why it's the National Mathematics Day, I guess all of us who have assembled here know that this is the birthday of Srinivasa Ramanujan. We are celebrating his birthday, and we are also celebrating the National Mathematics Day. Our speaker this afternoon is Professor Rajendra Bhatia, who teaches mathematics at the Ashoka University. This particular lecture, yesterday we had one and today we have another, is a series of 2 lectures on mathematics. This is being held or has been organized as a part of the India International Science Festival of the Government of India, which is, again, it's been organized jointly by the Indian Academy of Sciences and the Academy Trust of the Indian Academy of Sciences. Today's talk is titled The Marvelous Number Pi, and it's going to be a feast that we are going to be provided by Professor Rajendra Bhatia. Let me take this opportunity to introduce Professor Rajendra Bhatia. Professor Rajendra Bhatia currently teaches mathematics at the Ashoka University near Delhi, as I've just mentioned to you. He graduated from the Indian Statistical Institute and spent most of his teaching life and research life at the Indian Statistical Institute. My name is Partha Majumdar. I'm the president of the Indian Academy of Sciences and the chairman of the Academy Trust. Professor Bhatia, has been my colleague for the largest part of my academic career, which I also spent at the Indian Statistical Institute. So we are like buddies at the Indian Statistical Institute. So it's really an honor and pleasure for me to introduce Rajendra. After graduating from the Indian Statistical Institute, Professor Bhatia spent a large number of years at the University of California in Berkeley and at the TIFR. Subsequently, he joined the Indian Statistical Institute and was, during his career at the Indian Statistical Institute, he visited, he left the institute for short periods of time and visited many universities throughout the world. He has written many books, and most of his books have been on matrix analysis or matrix algebra. By one account, he is the highest cited mathematician from India in the world. So he, of course, is very, well honored, very well decorated. He is a fellow of all of the 3 major science academies of India and the World Academy of Sciences. He has received the INSA Medal for Young Scientists, the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award, and the Hans Schneider Prize. Currently, he is a J.C. Bose National Fellow and is a National Lecturer of the University Grants Commission. He actually serves on editorial boards of many major journals, edits special issues of these journals, and so on. So he has a very large number of accomplishments, not all of which I know, or if I try to state those that I know, it will take a long time. So without further ado, let me again express my deepest gratitude to Professor Rajendra Bhatia for accepting our invitation to deliver this talk as a part of the India International Science Festival, on the title of the talk being The Marvelous Number Pi. I will take an exit and not come back, not exit from the talk, but I will listen to the talk, but I'll take an exit from the podium and essentially not come back, hand over the podium to Professor Tirthankar Bhattacharya. Tirthankar Bhattacharya is a professor of mathematics at the Indian Institute of Science, and he also has a legacy from the Indian Statistical Institute. So essentially, this is being presented by the Indian Statistical Institute. So to say, 3 of us are all from the Indian Statistical Institute. So like I said, without further ado, let me invite Professor Rajendra Bhatia and hand over the podium to Professor Tirthankar Bhattacharya, who will conduct the rest of the session, including questions and answers at the end.
All right, over to you, Rajendra.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the very kind introduction. It has already been said, today is the National Mathematics Day and the birthday of Srinivasa Ramanujan. This talk I had first given on a similar occasion in 2012, which was 125 years of Ramanujan. And the mandate given to me at that time was that one should pick up one of the 4 themes which you see here. It should be about core mathematics. It should explain the nature of mathematics, reasoning and proofs, something about history, and in particular contributions of Indian mathematicians. And I was wondering what to speak on one of these topics. And then I realized that if I talk about pi, I can cover all the 4. And that's what you will see in this talk. It's a very simple number, which we all know about. We are told it's 22/7 first, and then something else, and then something else. So if you were to ask, and my talk is intended primarily for high school students. Of course, others are welcome, but that will be the level at which I'll be pitching the talk. So if you ask a student what is pi, so the likely answer you are able, is that area of a circle is pi times r square, or the circumference is 2 pi times r. And one has to wonder what that means, and then you are told that pi is approximately this or that. So let's make it a little more rigorous. I have a circle whose diameter is d and circumference is c and area is a. One can see fairly easily that the circumference is proportional to the diameter and the area is proportional to d squared. For one, circumference and d are both lengths. Area is length squared, so that seems right. Now, when you have 2 things proportional, it means there is a constant of proportionality, that c over d is constant, and let's call that constant pi. Pi actually stands for perimeter. It's the Greek letter for p. And area being proportional to d square, there is some other constant k such that a is equal to k times d square. And at this stage, it's not clear that there should be any relation between pi and k. There are 2 constants. One is pi, and that's the definition of pi. And the other constant is k, and we have to first ask whether these 2 have any connection with each other. And yes, they do have, and that's one of the first things proved by Archimedes, of whom all of us have heard. So the theorem he proved was, if A is the area of a circle whose circumference is c and whose radius is r, then A is equal to T, where T is the area of a right-angled triangle whose base is C and height is R. So please look at this formulation. This is one of the first great theorems in mathematics. And okay, so here is a picture showing this. So here is the circle with circumference C, radius R. That C has been made the base and the height has been made R. And these areas of these 2 figures are the same. So the theme here which I want to emphasize is that a more complicated problem. So we are first taught how to calculate areas of rectangles. Then we go to triangles, then to more complicated polygons, and then to the circle. So a more complicated problem has been reduced to a simpler one. That is what is achieved by this theorem. I will not give you all the proof, but 2 major ideas of the proof. First is the method of exhaustion, and that is again replacing the circle by polygons. We can put a regular polygon inside the circle very close to the boundary. And we can also put a polygon outside the circle very close to the boundary and make the 2 comes closer and closer. So that's the method of exhaustion, forerunner of calculus. And second is a proof by contradiction. We want to prove 2 numbers are equal. Now there are 3 possibilities. A is bigger than B, A is smaller than B, and A is equal to B. Only one of these holds. So to prove that A is equal to B, we show that if I assume A is bigger than B or smaller than B, there is a contradiction. So A must be equal to B. So these are the 2 major ideas in the proof, which go into many of the proofs in present day mathematics. So here is the idea of the proof of the connection between the constant pi and k with which I began. So we know A is equal to k times r square, C is equal to 2 pi r, and I want to show k is equal to pi. This is the same thing as showing that A is equal to 1/2 times RC. So that's what we have to show. So look at the triangle with base B and height H. Then we all know the area of this is half H times B. So I start with the triangle. Then I go to a regular polygon. So suppose I have a polygon with n sides, regular polygon, go to its center and break it up into triangles. So the area of this triangle is 1/2 H times B. And if there are n sides, I get n such triangles. So the area of that polygon is 1/2 HB times n. And what's the circumference? Because there are n sides, each of length b, the circumference is bn. So you easily get this relation, A is equal to 1/2 H times C. And this very much looks like the formula we want for the circle. Now I go to the idea of exhaustion. So here is my circle in red. I put a polygon with blue sides around it, a regular polygon. Here you see the figure with 8 sides, here with 16. And that height H is R because this side of the polygon is tangent to the circle. Now you choose more and more sides. The difference between the polygon and the circle can be made smaller and smaller. And by taking what we now call limits, you come to A is equal to 1/2 RC for the circle. So that essentially is the proof of Archimedes. So now we know that A is equal to pi r square and C is 2 pi r. And this is the same constant occurs in both the formulas. So that's a beautiful proof. I recommend by William Dunham called Journey Through Genius, where he has collected, each chapter deals with what he calls a great theorem in mathematics. And this is the first chapter there. So Archimedes also showed that this number pi is bounded above and below by two numbers which you see there, 3 times 3 and 10 over 71 and 3 and 10 over 70. So that is, it's between these two decimal expansions. And the value of pi known to us now is what you see here. So this is accurate up to 2 decimal places. By the way, that's the reason that has been chosen to observe a pi day every year. It's on March 14th, 3rd month and 14th day. So it comes from here. So that is Archimedes. He also proved other formulas, like the volume of sphere is 4 over 3 pi r cubed, surface area of sphere. And then he observed that a cylinder which you circumscribe about a sphere has volume 2 pi r cubed and surface area 6 pi r square. And then he noticed that the ratio of these numbers, volume of the cylinder to the volume of the sphere and surface area to the surface area of the sphere, are the same. So both are 3 over 2. He was very proud of this discovery and he requested that this should be put on his tomb. Apparently his tomb can be located and this is there. Now I tell you something related to this. So Archimedes, we have seen, proved great theorems. He was also a great experimenter. So you have all heard his famous Eureka story that he invented levers, pulleys, catapults, Archimedean screw with which water can be lifted from a lower level to higher level. His pupils also devised a very clever experiment to measure the diameter of the earth or the perimeter of the earth. And since it's related to pi, I have chosen to tell you about that. So 3 very simple ideas. On the globe, you have seen meridians, latitudes, and longitudes. So the longitudes go from North Pole to South Pole. And every day the sun crosses all points on a meridian at the same time. On the day of an equinox, at noon, the sun is directly overhead at the equator. So yesterday we had the winter solstice here in the northern hemisphere and summer solstice in the southern hemisphere. So for the summer solstice at the Tropic of Capricorn, the sun is directly overhead at noon. So when you have a light directly above you, there is no shadow. So on the day of the equinox, At noon, if you put a stick at the equator, you will see no shadow. The further away you move, the longer will be the shadow of that stick. So from these measurements, you can infer the angular separation between 2 points on the Earth. And from this, the perimeter can be calculated. So here are pictures of what I'm trying to tell you. So here is the sunlight coming, hitting us at the equator. And here it is further up north, and further still, and further still. So that's the reason for having winter and summer, that there's a tilt of the Earth, and the light gets dispersed over a bigger area. So this is what this picture shows you. So from this, I can try and infer what this angle is here. And if I know this distance to go around the Earth, I have to go 2 pi. So I can get an estimate or a measurement of the circumference of the Earth. So that's what Eratosthenes did, except he wasn't at the equator. He was at a place called Cn on the Tropic of Cancer. And the second place was Alexandria. And from the measuring the shadow of the stick at noon, they were able to infer what this angular separation is. So here is simple trigonometry. I have 2 points here. I have a stick AP of length A here and stick BQ of length B, and these two are the shadows. The length of the shadow is SA here, SB here, and all of you are studying trigonometry in school. So you can infer what's the tangent of the angle theta A this and theta B. And from there, you can get the perimeter of the Earth, because to go around the Earth, you have to go 2 pi. And to go between these 2 points, you have to go theta B minus theta A. So very clever experiment. It's audacious to think that you can measure the perimeter of the Earth at that time. And it's good use of theory. It's also skills in measurement. It's said that the result they got is quite close to the modern value which we have got by much more sophisticated equipment. Okay, now I change the theme. So as the word geometry suggests, it was measurement of the Earth. So people were measuring their fields and lengths and areas. So it was believed that every number, so number is associated with a length. So you can divide a length into 1/2, 1/4, 1/3. So it was expected that every number is of the form P over Q, where P and Q are integers. So 3 over 7 or 4 over 29. And the Greek mathematicians, having discovered the Pythagorean theorem, soon realized that square root of 2. So if you have a right angle triangle with 2 sides 1, then the hypotenuse is square root of 2. And they could prove that that's not a rational number. Now, these days, many students have learned that proof. So it's an easy and beautiful proof. If you have learned that, I encourage you to think about whether square root of 3 is rational, and more generally, for which number n is square root of n rational. So there were numbers which corresponded to lengths which are not rational numbers, but Greek mathematicians didn't pursue this theme. So much later, mathematicians started worrying about these, which number is rational and which is not. So in 1761, it was proved pi is irrational. The proof is a little more complicated than that for square root of 2, but not too difficult. Those of you who are studying calculus can do it as a small project. Then little later, 1794, it was proved that pi square is also irrational. So notice that if a number is irrational, its square could be rational, like square root of 2. Square is 2, which is a rational number. But the converse is not true. So this is a little stronger. The other number we all learn about in school is E. That was also proved to be irrational. And so is its square. E square is also irrational. Now, even for such simple numbers, there are very hard problems which have not yet been solved. So, for example, it's not known today whether pi plus E is a rational number or not. And is pi times E rational? That's also not known. We know one of them has to be irrational, but which one or both, we do not know. Now, this is because we know something about what are called algebraic numbers. So if a number x is a solution of an algebraic polynomial equation. So here you see a polynomial equation with coefficients a1, a2, an, which are rational numbers. And if x satisfies one such equation, so I repeat, a polynomial equation with rational coefficients, if x is a solution of that, we say x is an algebraic number. Obviously, all rational numbers are algebraic. Then some numbers like square root of 2 could be irrational, but still be algebraic. And it was proved that pi is not an algebraic number. So it does not satisfy any polynomial equation with rational coefficients. Such numbers are called transcendental. So as a result, it cannot be expressed in anything of this kind. Square root of 97 plus square root of 6. And also from here, it follows that no power of pi can be rational. Because if pi to the power n was rational, then it will be an algebraic number. So not just pi, pi square, no power of pi can be rational. And one consequence of this is that it's impossible to square this circle. So this means that if I give you a compass and a ruler, now to be clear what a ruler means, it's like a rod, straight edge, but no marks on it. Then with just this equipment, so a compass and a straight edge without any markings, you cannot construct the number pi. And that is because another theorem tells us that if your number is constructible, then it has to be algebraic. So if you want to read more about these ideas, there's a very nice book, Courant and Robbins, What is Mathematics? There's a large section or maybe a chapter devoted to this question. Okay, now I changed the theme once again. So pi was introduced as the ratio of the circumference to the diameter. So one may ask, does it have anything to do with numbers 1, 2, 3, etc.? So these are discrete, so to say, that is continuous. And surprisingly, there is a lot which pi has to do with numbers like 1, 2, 3, integers. So for this, I have to tell you what are infinite series. So infinite series is a sum like a1 plus a2 plus a3 plus an plus ... That means you go on adding according to the prescription which tells you what an is. So for example, I could start with the simplest thing, 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, and go on. So obviously, the sum is n, it goes on increasing with n, so we say this series diverges. By the way, yesterday's talk, there was a question which said 1 plus 2 plus 3 is equal to minus 12. So in that sense, this also has an answer, it's minus 1 over half. But in the usual sense, this is a divergent series. On the other hand, if I take a series of this type, 1 plus 1 half plus 1 4 plus ... this converges. So you can think of this, I have a bucket, I fill at the first step half of it. At the next step, I fill 1/2 of what is remaining, that's 1/4. At the next step, 1 over 8, and I go on doing this. Then I will never cross 1, and I will come as close to 1 as I wish. So in that sense, the sum of this series is 2, 1 plus 1. It's a little less obvious that this series, 1 plus 1/2 plus 1 over 3, nth term 1 over n, this diverges. This needs a little more subtle proof, but that's true. Now, such series were studied in India extensively in the 14th, 15th century, and maybe before. So, Madhavacharya and then his follower Neelkantha, who compiled this into a book, Tantra Sangraha, they have this beautiful formula, 1 minus 1 over 3 plus 1 over 5 minus 1 over 7, etc. is pi over 4. So for those of you in college who are studying infinite series, I want to tell you that proving a series is convergent is relatively easier. So for example, this is an alternating series, minus plus, and the terms are decreasing in modulus. So you can see fairly easily that the series should converge. Finding the sum of the series is quite another matter. Now this is pi over 4 is remarkable. So this is the Madhava series. In the European literature, it's known as the Gregory-Leibniz series. And one easy proof of this is if you use Taylor series for functions. So in particular for tan inverse z, arc tan z, we can write a Taylor series and choose z is equal to 1, you get this. So this is what calculus teaches us, and our ancient mathematicians in Kerala, well, not quite ancient, these are Middle Ages, had already done such things. So that's something interesting. So here is how they expressed it. I have shown you here a Sanskrit shloka which expresses this formula. I will not read it out, but Vyas is, for example, radius and so on, and it tells you how to write the terms of this series. Its English translation is here, which again, you need not worry about everything which is written there, but it tells you how to proceed to get that series. So in modern language, this is the circumference, which we talked about. This is the diameter. C over D is 4 times this series. So what is remarkable here is not only are they expanding it in terms of a series, they are also telling us if you stop at the pth term, what is the remainder, so to say. So these are very modern ideas, truncation errors in summing of series and so on, and this was done quite some time back. In the same vein, there are infinite products which involve pi. So here are 2 of them. So pi over 2 is 2 over 1 times 2 over 3 times 4 over 3, 4 over 5. This continues. Now, if you want to learn more about this, I recommend the book I have written on Fourier series, from which it's easy to get such formulas. All right, now another thing like summation 1 over n squared. That's one of the most famous sums in mathematics. The answer is pi square over 6. This was called the Basel problem because the famous mathematicians Bernoullis lived in the town Basel in Switzerland. So they had posed the problem of calculating the sum of this series. As I said, showing that the series is convergent is not too difficult, but finding its sum is quite another matter. So this is one of the most famous formulas, involves pi and squares of the integers. So here I want to show you what was Euler's first proof, and I have put proof in inverted commas because there are statements which you believe, but you can't really prove at that time of mathematics. So here is the idea. If you take a polynomial equation, so I guess in high school or a little later, we are taught the theory of equations. So you have a degree m polynomial. It has m roots, which are alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha m. What is the relation between these roots and these coefficients? One of them is if you take the summation 1 over alpha I, so sum up the reciprocals of all the roots, then you get minus a1 over a0. So that has been known for a long time. It was known in Euler's time, of course. Now you look at the function cosine of square root of x. And now this is not a polynomial, but it has a Taylor expansion, which you see here. And we also know where is cosine 0. So this function has zeros at the points I have written here. Now you make, as Euler did, a leap of faith that the same relation which we believed, which we knew was true for the roots of a polynomial and its coefficients, let's stretch it a little bit and let's assume or believe that it's also true for infinite degree polynomials, that's those Taylor series. And if you do that, this is what you get, from which you get pi square over 6. Of course, Euler was aware that there is something missing in that proof, and this was made rigorous a little later. And Euler himself discovered infinite product expansions. And now several proofs of this are known. Again, one of them using Fourier series. Okay, now changing the theme a little bit. Pi can appear at unexpected places, like one of them I'll show you. So look at the integers, of course, 0, 1, 2, and negative minus 1, minus 2. So these are equally spaced points on the real line. Z square. So these are pairs Mn, where M and N are integers. They make a lattice. So these are all points in the plane whose coordinates are integers. Question, how many points of the lattice are visible from the origin? So let me show you a picture. This red dot is the origin, and you see the gray dot, the lattice. So from here I can see this point 1, 1, let's say. So assume I have infinite vision. I can see up to infinity, but I don't have X-ray vision. So this 1, 1 comes on the way to the next point 2, 2. So 2, 2 is hidden by this. And all points beyond and that line are hidden. I can see this point. I can see this point, but this will hide the points behind that. So question, what proportion of points? So I repeat, I have infinitely good vision. I can see as far as I need to, but not X-ray vision. So how many points are visible? So now how to convert this problem into something about numbers? So Mn is visible if and only if M and N are co-prime. So our question becomes, among all points of Z2, what is the proportion of pairs Mn that are visible? So what is the proportion of points that have co-prime coordinates? So in number theory, we study many such problems. So I'll explain a simpler problem, easier to explain, but equivalent. So how many numbers are square free? What does square free mean? So you have a positive integer n. You can factorize it into primes. So P1 occurs with power M1, P2 with M2, Pk with Mk. If each prime in this factoring occurs exactly once, then we say n is square free. So no prime is squared in this representation. So for example, 72 into 5 into 7 is square free. On the other hand, 92 into 3 square into 5 is not square free. So what is the proportion of square free numbers? Okay, so that means if I pick up a number at random, what's the probability of it being square free? I'm rephrasing the question slightly differently. So if you pick up a number at random, then it's either odd or even with equal probability. That's probability 1/2. If it's to be a multiple of k, then the probability is 1 over k. The probability that it's not a multiple of k, therefore, is 1 minus 1 over k. So if I look at the sequence of primes, and then the probability that a random number is not a multiple of pj square by this argument is 1 minus 1 over pj squared. So the probability that none of them is a factor is the product of these. So I repeat, to be square free means this probability. So how to find this infinite product? Now I have to rush through this, so I will not. There's an article I have written on this in Resonance. Professor Bhattacharya will give you the link where this problem is explained further. But I must tell you that this gets linked with the zeta function. So zeta of s is the sum of the series n is equal to 1 to infinity 1 over n to the power s. If s is bigger than 1, this series converges. And this is of great importance in the study of prime numbers. Euler in particular proved that zeta function at s is the infinite product 1 over 1 minus 1 upon pi to the power s, where you are running over the sequence of primes. So that's the product we were interested in with s is equal to 2. So the answer to our problem of the probability of being square free is, so I have to skip through this because I'm running out of time. So that is Euler's theorem. So this probability is 1 upon zeta over 2, which I told you Euler had calculated that zeta 2 was pi square over 6. So this is 6 over pi square. So that is 0.6079. And you can see with a little bit of work, if you follow this, that also tells you the probability of two numbers picked at random being co-prime. And if you want to study more of this, look at this beautiful book, Hardy and Wright, introduction to the theory of numbers. So, as I said, now mathematicians say something is beautiful. What it means is it's not obvious. There is surprise. There is elegance in the methods, like what you saw here, converting the problem about visibility into something about co-prime, then linking it, bringing tools from other areas of mathematics, etc., and connections between different things. So here is a quote from a famous mathematician, Atle Selberg, one of the great mathematicians of the 20th century, working in number theory, which you can read. I had started reading mathematics when I was about 13. I accidentally opened a book and I came across Leibniz series, pi over 4 is equal to this. This is the Madhva Nilkantha series. Till then, school mathematics had always bored me. But this seemed such a very strange and beautiful relationship that I determined I would read that book in order to find out how this formula came about. So this series is the first inspiring thing about mathematics which Selberg saw and pulled him into mathematics. So now here again something, so zeta 4, that summation 1 over n to the power 4, you can prove it's pi to the power 4 over 90 and so on. Remarkably, it's not too difficult to find the values of the zeta function at even integers. And one good way of doing it is via Fourier series. But if you want to know the values of the zeta function at odd integers, it's a very difficult problem. Even proving whether it's rational or irrational is very difficult. So Apéry, French mathematician, in 78 showed zeta 3 is an irrational number, and not much else is known about its being exactly that what number is rational or what is irrational among these. So if you can't prove that, then there are substitute theorems that at least one of zeta 5, zeta 7 up to zeta 21 is irrational. Just as I said, either pi plus e or pi e, both cannot be rational. So some theorems of that kind. All right, so here is another direction. In statistics and probability, you often see pi. So one reason for that is that the integral, so this is the normal distribution as it's called, the bell-shaped curve. Integral of this from minus infinity to infinity is square root of pi. So naturally pi occurs often in questions on probability. But here is something little unusual, of course well known, where pi again makes an appearance. So I have a sheet of paper or the floor with parallel lines at distance 1 from each other, distance d. So this distance between, so rule a paper with straight lines parallel to each other at distance d. And you have a needle of length L, where L is smaller than or equal to d. And I start throwing this needle at random on this sheet of paper. So sometimes it will intersect the lines and sometimes it will not. The question is, what is the probability of the needle to intersect one of the lines? Now, if you think about it, obviously the probability will be proportional to the length. The longer the needle, the better the chance of it hitting one of the lines. And the probability will be inversely proportional to this distance. The more distance the lines are apart, the less likely the needle will hit one of them. So P is proportional to L and P is proportional to 1 over D. So there is a constant such that P is equal to C times L over D. So what is that constant? That constant happens to 2 over pi. And this is one of the first theorems in a subject called geometric probability or integral geometry. I had 2 proofs here. I'll give you one of them just to indicate quickly. So here is the needle. I have thrown it on this sheet of paper. So this length is L. This is the midpoint. So this length is L over 2. The distance of this point from the line closest to it is this X. So the condition for your hitting this line is that this distance X should be less than or equal to D over 2. And this angle which you see here between the needle and this perpendicular is phi, which should be less than or equal to pi over 2. So the condition for the needle to intersect a line is that this distance X should be smaller than L over 2, which is this length, times cosine of pi. So now we have to calculate what's the probability of that. So assume x and phi are uniformly distributed, independent random variables. I guess everybody knows that somewhat vaguely at least. And x has to be between 0 and d over 2. Phi has to be between 0 and pi over 2. And we saw the condition for your crossing the line was x is less than or equal to L over 2 times cosine phi. So in this picture, x is plotted along the y-axis, along this axis. Phi is plotted here. This range is 0 to pi over 2, and so on. And our condition is x is less than L over 2 cosine pi. That's this curve. So the probability of your lying in this region is this area which you see in red divided by the area of the rectangle. I have written blue rectangle, but I could color only part of it. So rectangle, this whole rectangle. And this can be easily calculated using calculus. You will see that you get 2 over pi. I will have to skip the other proof because I want to go into something else. All right, this is Ramanujan's birthday, so it's appropriate to cite some series which he studied because of problems coming from number theory, again, somewhat mysterious, that 1 over pi is the sum of this series which you see here and of this series here. Now I want to return to the beginning of the talk. I began by saying that if you look at any circle, look at the ratio of the circumference to diameter, it's the same for every circle. And this ratio is what we call pi. Now, retract a little bit from that, surprisingly. And the retraction is partial, of course. In plane geometry or flat geometry, this is of course the case. But if you go to non-Euclidean geometry or curved geometry, this has to be modified. So I'm saying the ratio of the circumference to diameter, which was the very definition of pi, will not be pi if you go to spherical geometry, for example. So there are two other geometries which people study, elliptical geometry and hyperbolic geometry. So this is the special case. You have now you have to believe a little bit. This is something which has positive curvature, and hyperbolic geometry is geometry on such surfaces. This has negative curvature. So like a circle and like a sphere. So I will be talking only of the sphere. So look at the surface of the sphere. Now in Euclidean geometry, you see that through any 2 points, you can draw a unique straight line segment. If you are on the sphere, then you cannot draw. If you draw a straight line, it will go outside or inside the sphere. But the replacement for that is you can find a great circle passing through those 2 points. I will show you a picture soon. One exception has to be made. If you are at antipodal points, then there are infinitely many lines, infinitely many circles going through them. So North Pole and South Pole, there are infinitely many meridian lines going through them. And the distance is measured along this geodesic, called that DAB. So let me show you a picture so that it becomes clear what I'm saying. So this is the surface of the globe or a sphere. I have 2 points AB. Through them, we can draw a unique great circle, which is like this. Now I could have gone from A to B along this path or this path. So geodesic is the one which is of minimal length. So that is this segment which you see there. So given 2 points A and B on a sphere, we can find a unique great circle going through them, except if A and B were antipodal, then there will be infinitely many, like North Pole and South Pole. And the shorter of these two lengths, I call the distance between A and B. I hope that's clear enough. So what will be the circles? The circle by definition, so if the center of the circle is A and radius R is given, then by definition, the circle with center A and radius R is all those points X which are at distance R from A. So just for convenience, choose S to be the sphere whose radius is 1. Choose A to be the North Pole. Then the circles with center at the North Pole and different radii are these latitudinal lines which you see here. So with this definition, the equator on the sphere is the circle with center at the North Pole and radius pi over 2. So the circle CA pi over 2 is the equator. These are all the points at distance pi over 2 from the North Pole. So if you calculate 2 pi times r, that is 2 pi into pi over 2, you get pi square. On the other hand, what is the circumference of the equator? So I assume the radius of the sphere I'm considering is 1. So the circumference of the equator on that sphere is 2 pi. So the circumference is 2 pi. Radius 2 pi times 2 pi is pi square, but these two numbers are not equal. So to sum up what I have said, that the definition of pi which we began with and what we proved at the beginning, that there's a relation between that constant k and pi. That's not the same relation which you have on the surface of the sphere. So the circumference of the equator is 2 pi, and 2 pi times r is in this case pi square. So what I said at the beginning is not true in spherical geometry. So these geometries are different. The sum of the angles of a triangle in plane geometry is told to us is 2 pi, and if you go into these geometries, it's either bigger as here or smaller. So in negative curvature, that sum of the three angles is smaller than 2 pi. Here it's bigger than 2. So now a mathematician thinks that my definition of pi, which I gave through circles, probably is not that fundamental. Of course, that's how pi entered mathematics and in human thinking. But if it changes with the kind of geometry we are doing, if there was a creature who didn't know what Euclid's planes are, but knows what sphere is, then that definition is not valid. So can I define pi without any reference to the circle at all in some other way? Yes, we can. And one way of doing it is the following. So if I give you any real number x, or a complex number for that matter, then look at this infinite series, which you see here, x minus x cube over 3 factorial, x5 over alternating series with these terms. Then one can prove that this series converges no matter what x is, and call that function of x, which you get here, sine of x. Similarly, you can define cosine of x in this way. Odd terms here, even terms here. So for every number x, not necessarily between 0 and 1, I can define, or 0 and 2 pi, I can define sine x and cosine x. These need not be angles of a triangle. Given any real number or any complex number, I can define the sine of that number by an infinite series. One can show that this series converges. That's the definition of sine. Now, of course, it must relate to what we were taught in school, that sine is the ratio of the perpendicular to the hypotenuse, cos is the ratio of the base to the hypotenuse. So one can prove that sine square x plus cosine square x is equal to 1. So sine x and cosine x are therefore related to the circle, and through them to triangles. So it does connect and capture the old definition of sine and cosine which we had. But it frees it from triangles. We can define it via analysis. So it will be the same no matter what kind of geometer you are. It's something coming from analysis, as we think. Now one can show that there exists several numbers t for which sine t is 0. Sine is a periodic function, so very often it becomes 0. And the analyst definition of pi is the smallest number t naught for which sine of t naught is 0. So let me repeat, because this is an important idea. I define sine of x and cosine of x through infinite series. Then one can prove that sine square x plus cosine square x is equal to 1. The function has 0 values at many points. Choose that t naught, which is the smallest among those, and call that number pi. So now I have a definition of pi without any reference to circles. And of course, as I said, the two notions are related and are consistent. So here is a somewhat tragic piece of history. There was a famous German mathematician, Edmund Landau, great analyst, number theorist. So in his courses in the early part of the 20th century, he gave this as the definition of pi in his lectures. Now, those were bad times for Germany and for the rest of humanity. I hope all of you are aware of that, know that. So the then government dictated that this is un-German mathematics. It's against our national culture to give this definition of pi. And for that, he was dismissed from his job. So that's somewhat tragic piece of history. And here is an amusing piece of history. In 1897, in the state of Indiana in the US, some senator introduced a bill where he told people what should be the legal value of pi, among other things. So this was the resolution: be it enacted by the General Assembly of the state of Indiana that it has been found that the ratio of the diameter and circumference is as 5/4 to 4. So he wanted a law which would say that the ratio of the circumference to diameter is 3.2. Close, but not quite pi. So that's somewhat comic that some senator should think that the value of pi should be dictated by a law rather than by mathematicians. And I end by asking, are there lessons for us in these two episodes, one comic and one tragic? Who should determine what is the value of pi, which is best left to mathematicians and students of mathematics? Thank you.
Karan asks, how do we measure the size of the universe in terms of pi?
That's surely a more difficult question to which I have no answer. The earth is spherical, so one can go around it, and we know something about circles. Now, universe is more complicated, and I do not know the answer. But I would guess pi would occur there. So yesterday, Professor Ono showed you a formula about partitions. So pi has this habit of appearing in places where you don't expect it to appear. So I would think pi will appear there, but not exactly how.
Is it possible to calculate the square root of pi?
Calculate in what sense? Now that's you don't have the exact value. It will not be a rational number. So you can go on finding its decimal expansion.
Yeah. So one can find approximation.
You can calculate pi, so you can get good upper bounds, lower bounds, as close to it as you want, and so on.
Okay, this is an interesting question. How do we decide whether a surface has negative curvature or positive curvature?
Well, I can give you a rough idea. So stand at the North Pole and look at the great circles and look at the tangents to them. Now, the great circles tend to come closer to each other than the tangents. And that is more or less one definition of positive curvature. If you do the same thing on the surface of a hyperboloid, then you will see that the geodesics are spreading out faster than the tangents, and that's negative curvature. So there are various ways of doing this. So I said, stand at the North Pole, draw the great circles, and look at the tangents. So the tangents are spreading out faster than the geodesics. That's positive curvature. So that's one way of defining, easiest way. Then you have to worry about how to calculate the curvature and so on. So you have to learn a little bit more of differential geometry, as it is called, curvature of curves, then of surfaces, and so on.
So one of the questions about the universe, whether it can be measured by pi, I might have. There was a lecture by an astrophysicist. He says that the farther you go, if you look from the microscopic point of view, the universe is anisotropic. But the farther you go, the more distance we get to see, we end up seeing that it is actually isotropic. And so it actually is kind of spherical. The larger vision of the universe is roughly spherical. So I guess because pi is so closely related to curved surfaces, we should be able to measure even the universe at some point of time in relation with pi as with the pi formula.
Yeah, thank you, Shubhankar. These are difficult questions.
Yeah.
I will opt there, but we are not sure how. Yeah, okay. I guess that's all. We do not have any further questions right now. So, and there are many comments saying that thank you for the excellent talk. Many people have put that in the comment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, something either that or something similar to that. All right, then we shall probably close this session by thanking you profusely for your time. Thank you very much.